Buongiorno professor Pantano, oggi 4
Buonasera,
novembre.
buongiorno, come
Buongiorno
vuole.
a lei, benvenuto a quelli che ci ascoltano e a quelli che ci ascolteranno dopo. Oggi 4
4,
novembre è
4
anniversario.
novembre, 4 novembre,
Sì,
4 novembre.
diciamo in questi giorni Ezra Pound, diciamo, nasceva e moriva, cioè è morto nel 72, novembre del 72 a Venezia ed è nato, mi sembra, nel
30 ottobre,
è
30
nato,
ottobre
sì,
85,
nel 1885 è nato, sì, esattamente, ma
30 ottobre, sì.
oggi ricorre anche un anniversario che ormai in Italia non si festeggia più, se non ricordarlo per sommi capo quando capita, cioè diciamo così, l'armistizio,
Sì,
meglio,
sì.
il trattato sì, l'armistizio di Vittorio Veneto, cioè la conclusione della prima guerra mondiale, che ci costò una cifra di morti come se la guerra più che vincerla l'avessimo persa, perché 650.000 morti, mamma mia, e a pensarci è una catastrofe, come dire è morta, che so, mezza Napoli, che ne so.
No, no, mezza di quel tempo.
No, no,
Sì,
dico
sì, sì, di oggi sì.
oggi,
Sì, sì.
noi parliamo di oggi, no, dico, è una cifra pazzesca perché gli austro-ungarici ebbero 400.000 morti e noi 650.000 morti. Cioè, oh, cioè, è come se avessimo perso noi più che loro. Vuol dire una cosa davvero impressionante quello che accade, perché poi io me ne resi conto anni fa quando andai a visitare il Sacrario di Puglia, dove penso che sia uno dei cimiteri più grandi al mondo perché ci sono 100.000 salme, 100.000, cioè il
È
cimitero
una
militare.
distesa, è
No.
un- una scalea inimmaginabile, una
Sì, sì, sì,
distesa
è una cosa, guardi, che quando
della
si
quale
va.
non si vede la fine, ecco.
No, no, quando si va lì si rimane impressionato, poi quando si legge le date dei nomi dei caduti da 18, 19 anni a 24 anni, 25 massimo, cioè una gioventù fatta massacrare in modo ignobile, e devo dire per una causa che si poteva risolvere anche diplomaticamente, come dimostra il caso generale Alberto Pollio,
Guardi,
che
guardi,
qua,
guardi, guardi,
prego.
prendiamo la palla al balzo e
Mm.
perché c'è un riferimento di ordine storico che poi potremmo anche infilare nelle cose di Pound, ma è bene che invece lo blocchiamo adesso.
Mhm.
Quell'esercito italiano là ebbe purtroppo piena continuità dal 22 al 43 anche con il regime fascista, il
Beh, sì,
quale regime non riuscì a scardinare la mentalità eh,
Badogliesca.
sì, proprio, ecco, io stavo per dire piemontese, ma ha ragione
Sì, sì, sì,
forse
no,
lei.
ma Badogliesca
Badoglio
perché poi,
peraltro era piemontese,
ma infatti,
quella di condurre le guerre col sacrificio degli uomini e non magari con la tattica e la strategia dei capi, i quali muovevano le divisioni sul terreno, a differenza di quello che aveva fatto Hitler, che sapeva muoverle ed non era un militare di carriera, muovevano le divisioni sul terreno semplicemente sulla base del numero e quindi creando solo danni, ma non con l'accortezza e la vivacità dell'inventore. L'inventore, il creatore, qui andiamo a Pound, è il poeta. Questi non potevano essere poeti perché erano poveri uomini
beh,
e ha ragione lei nel rilievo, 650.000 morti in una guerra che
eh,
poi fu stabile, perché fu sempre
sì,
lì in quella zona.
sì,
Potrei immaginare avessero invaso tutto il Veneto, fossero arrivati a Bologna, a un certo punto diventava un altro discorso, invece stavano
è qui,
sempre lì.
San Piave,
E Piave, il Trentino, sempre lì.
esatto.
In un campo che se uno guarda come il fronte era di
Sì, sì,
300-400 chilometri, quindi robetta,
esatto, esatto.
robetta.
Ma
Davanti a
lo può
quelle che
dire
sono le
forte,
guerre moderne.
lo può dire forte, fu Roberto, esattamente, proprio Roberto. In effetti sto dicendo che è una cosa, quello che successe, diciamo, visto che oggi è 4 novembre, sì, parliamo di Pound, ma non possiamo non ricordare anche queste cose che fanno parte della nostra memoria storica, Cioè, la prima guerra mondiale, lei sa che c'è tutto un fatto, dei fatti di retroscena che non ci fanno sapere, non vogliono, che si poteva divenire comunque a una conclusione senza far massacrare tutte quelle centinaia di migliaia di vittime, per non parlare di 1 milione fra ferite e invalidi e tutto il resto.
Guardi, un'aggiunta. Anche quando ci fu l'apporto, che fu costosissimo, degli Stati Uniti, quindi siamo nell'ultimo anno,
del 17
anche
intervennero.
costoro non seppero imporre una volontà strategica differente, perché mandarono armi e mezzi, anche uomini, ma subirono quello che era il vizio della monarchia italiana, la quale monarchia era una monarchia burocratica, tanto è vero che ci fece trovare indebitati per i famosi 2 miliardi e 400 milioni di dollari oro. Altro problema che poi fu lasciato al popolo italiano e quindi anche al Mussolini. Vede quanti argomenti stiamo toccando di ordine anche monetario, anche finanziario, che rientrano nei criteri creativi di Ezra Pound, che ci ha offerto il pretesto anche per parlare di birbonate.
Esatto.
Lei ha giustamente ricordato le 2 date di nascita e di morte, 1885 e 1972, quindi sono 87 anni di vita lunga, intensa, dolorosa anche,
Sì.
con in più l'innesto non trascurabile dei 13 anni di manicomio criminale comminatigli. Vede, in queste birbonate io annovero i molti che poi, a Pound morto, sono esplosi per appropriarsi della di lui memoria. Già a Pound vivo, e quindi adesso faccio un richiamo a cose che abbiamo già trattato lei ed io, ma che mi pare pochi nostri amici abbiano trattato, così come le sto indicando io. La storia di Pasolini, ripeto, l'ho riaccennata ieri a qualcuno, non mi ricordo a chi. Pasolini entra nella vita di Pound nel 1953. Quello che io sto raccontando è dovuto al professor Alfredo Rizzardi, che nel 1953 pubblica la traduzione dei Pisan Cantos per conto dell'editore Guanda, Lerici Scheiviller e Guanda insieme, i quali hanno pagato a questo americanista, professore di letteratura anglo-americana all'Università di Bologna, hanno pagato il suo lavoro. Una molto buona traduzione, salvo 2 o 3 note svarioni nelle note, eccetera, e racconta, l'ho sentito con le mie orecchie, nel 1984, al convegno fatto alla Fondazione Cini a Venezia, sull'isola di San Giorgio, su Ezra Pound, al quale hanno partecipato molti studiosi, anche autorevoli, ma anche molti cialtroni, avversari e denigratori per partito preso. E questo buon professor Rizzardi raccontò che subito dopo è uscito questa pubblicazione, che ebbe riscontro editoriale, fu catapultato a Bologna da Roma un giovane professorino di liceo, funzionario del Partito Comunista, arrivò in tale veste di nome Pasolini Pierpaolo, il quale aggredì sto professor Rizzardi, che era una persona molto semplice, molto, oserei dire anche timido, molto controllato, non uno sbruffone o un esibizionista alla Pasolini. Lo aggredì dicendo: vengo a nome del partito e ti redarguiamo perché hai tradotto tutto un fascista.
No.
Anche questo l'ho raccontato nel convegno dell'84 a Venezia il professor Rizzardi, al che lui replicò: io intanto di mestiere faccio l'anglista, l'americanista, e di conseguenza opero come voglio. Secondo poi non c'entra tradurre o non tradurre un fascista. Ho tradotto un'opera d'arte. E rimase il discorso in sospeso con il Partito Comunista, che era ferocemente contro nel 1953, mentre Pound era allegramente, lo dico in senso ironico, in manicomio criminale nelle mani degli statunitensi, visto che i comunisti italiani rispondevano a Mosca, avrebbero potuto semmai giocare la carta della detenzione ingiusta senza sentenza di Pound, ma era invece comodo a loro dare addosso al fascista. Perché? Perché a loro scocciava enormemente che Pound si fosse occupato di quei problemi politici in arte e in poesia che loro non riuscivano a toccare, perché appartenevano al fascismo e non potevano essere loro. Cioè, tanti concetti, ma soprattutto quello della libertà dell'individuo nell'ambito dello Stato organizzato in maniera che non fosse bolscevica, del vero concetto di libertà, della indipendenza dell'individuo dalla dipendenza della moneta, del denaro, e un'infinità di altri concetti, i rapporti con la natura, che poi oggi si chiama ecologia, tutti quei la cultura come concetto necessario per educare il popolo. Tutti questi concetti non potevano essere ammessi da loro perché li aveva già incasellati e sistemati nel novero delle dottrine sociali e della vera politica il fascismo. Allora, Pasolini fece quello che fece perché così gli era stato comandato, però fu incastrato in una situazione nel 1965, quindi siamo 10 anni dopo all'incirca, dopo che a Spoleto nel 64 Giancarlo Menotti, per tirar su le sorti anche monetarie del Festival di Spoleto, ingaggiò Pound e gli eseguì alcune delle sue musiche composte da Pound nell'ambito del Festival di Spoleto. E immediatamente l'anno successivo organizzò un festival internazionale dei poeti, al quale parteciparono dei premi Nobel. Non ho preso il libro dietro, ma l'elenco l'abbiamo letto 100.000 volte. Un paio di premi Nobel, personaggi del mondo sia africani che russi, Yevtushenko mi ricordo, anche avversari ideologicamente di Pound come Raffaele Alberti, come si chiama lì il sudamericano, oddio, c'ho un vuoto mentale, mi verrà in mente. Insomma, erano una trentina di personaggi di grande rilievo. C'era Quasimodo, Montale, Yevtushenko l'ho già accennato, Hierro, Ferlinghetti, americani, e tutti ammaliati da Pound, che in effetti veniva omaggiato e che non si sbilanciò perché lesse una sua traduzione delle Trachinie, punto e basta. Fecero da contorno a questa figura. Tra questi c'era anche Pasolini. Pasolini capì che aveva preso una cantonata abissale e quindi si sentì in dovere poi di cercare in tutti i modi di intrufolarsi nelle cose poundiane, avendole anche non studiate, ma lette con superficialità, e si riuscì a farsi infilare in alcune produzioni della Rai, che la Rai saggiamente stava mettendo insieme e che furono organizzate prima che Pound morisse, e prodotte tra la fine degli anni 60 e proprio il 1970 e 71. Lui si insinuò in queste produzioni organizzate da Vanni Roncisvalle e da Vittorio Contino, dal Gatto e da altri personaggi che gestivano in Rai le questioni culturali, e si fece passare per autore delle interviste, perché non fu l'autore. Lui a un certo punto riuscì dalla Rai a spiazzare gli intervistatori inserendosi ad insaputa di Pound e di Olga Raggio, perché andò a casa di loro e si presentò dicendo: adesso le domande le faccio io, con la vocina sua. Ecco, ho inquadrato un po' le cose. Pasolini era un uomo di provincia che aveva qualche qualità provinciale italiana, non le eccelse che gli vengono attribuite, e si imbatté anche in personaggi del dominio letterario. Lei se n'è andato? No, c'è ancora. Del dominio letterario del momento, che erano gli accademici di mestiere, alcuni dei quali li ho incontrati io stesso. Io mi sentii dire dal professor Agostino Lombardo, che aveva una faccia proprio sembrava Satana, e parlava anche davanti a un altro professore che veniva dall'Università di Milano e venne a Roma, Nemi D'Agostino, disse: siamo riusciti a togliere il dominio su Pound ai fascisti. Lo sciocco, stavo per dire cretino, no, il cretino non perché era scaltro, lo sciocco non sapeva che non era questione di essere o non essere fascisti, o forse lo sapeva.
Certo.
O forse lo sapeva, perché vede, è proprio lì lo stacco. Anche il Massimo Bacigalupo, che è quel professore ora in pensione a Rapallo, che vive a Rapallo, di famiglia facoltosa, legata, padre e madre legatissimi a Pound. La madre era il medico di Pound, però agente nell'ambito del Partito Comunista e redattore dell'Unità, esordì con un libro, L'ultimo Pound, al quale fu conferito addirittura un corposo premio, il premio Viareggio Giovanile, mi pare, opera prima, nel quale libro si disse, trattando la poesia di Pound, che però dal punto di vista politico le idee di Pound erano bislacche e tutte idiozie. Ho detto più o meno quello che, tra virgolette, lo ricordo a memoria, anche se non se saranno passati 30 anni da quando lessi 40 Bacigalupo in queste espressioni qua. Non è stato il solo. Anche nella cosiddetta area di destra, chiamiamola di neofascisti, sì, pochissimi sapevano di Pound.
Non mi meraviglio.
No.
Ma se non sanno nemmeno che cos'è fascismo.
Aspetti che condisco Pino Romualdi, l'unico uomo politico italiano che partecipò ai funerali.
Però.
Tripodi ne sapeva.
Ma Tripodi sicuramente.
Ezio Maria Grai ne sapeva. Ma altri balbettavano delle scemenze. Ci fu anzi uno che io ho frequentato e conosciuto personalmente, che mandai a quel paese poi negli ultimi anni della sua vita, ma che ebbe momenti di dominio nell'ambito del movimento sociale. Vogliamo non tenere col fiato sospeso chi ci sta ascoltando, di nome Pino Rauti, che confondeva i cantos con i pisancantos.
No!
Sì,
davvero?
Fui io che dovetti più volte precisargli, ma peraltro forse aveva letto alcuni versi appena, e mi infilò la figlia alle calcagna per cercare di sapere. E feci io alla figlia, che aveva 18 anni, fare il primo discorso in pubblico al Festival di Spoleto nel 1985, qui la Paola Ghini ricorderà. Le feci dire delle cose in quel convegno fatto su Pound, ma era gente che viveva così di spolveramenti, come si usa ancora adesso.
È incredibile. Poi parliamo di...
Come si usa ancora adesso in quell'ambiente là, dove c'è qualcuno che pubblica dei libri,
ma io...
mettersi in vista con titoli anche un po'...
Io rimango sbalordito di quello che sta dicendo
no,
lei.
E infatti le ho detto che vede, quando ci siamo sentiti ho detto parliamo, ma cercherò di distribuire a destra e a manca, come è giusto fare, delle sberle, mentre invece, che so io, devo ricordare in senso positivo. Lo conobbi personalmente, era un gentiluomo, il professor Dino Del Bo, che fu deputato democristiano, che nel 1948 presentò un'interrogazione sulla detenzione negli Stati Uniti, la sua prima interrogazione da deputato di Pound, il quale poi addirittura divenne vice segretario della Democrazia Cristiana in contrasto con Aldo Moro e fu presidente della Comunità Europea del Carbone e Acciaio, oltre che ministro molte volte. Dino Del Bo, un uomo di cultura. Allora, come vede, a qualcuno io attribuisco i giusti meriti e a qualcun altro do le giuste sberle. Ce ne sono alcuni. L'altro giorno qualcuno mi ha rifilato lo scritto di una signora, o anche tempo fa lo scritto di qualcun altro che dirige qualche rivistina, eccetera, che hanno i difetti di copiare e incollare notizie scritte da molte persone, che possono anche essere lo stesso Bacigalupo che ho citato, o anche io stesso, o anche altri, o anche Accame, ma dimenticarsi di dire da dove hanno fatto la citazione. Allora, Antonio Pantano, che ha una discreta, per ora ancora, memoria, la vista non eccessivamente buona, visto che quest'occhio qui che sto toccando fra 8 giorni sarà sotto intervento operatorio, ma ha un po' di memoria, sente appena scorre 20 righe degli scritti che mi mandano a valanghe persone di anche buona volontà, osserva che manca a costoro l'onestà, che è anche onestà intellettuale, di citare, perché non ci si deve vergognare di dire, beh, questo l'ho trovato nel libro del tale. Io stesso faccio spesso citazioni da Pound, quando è di Pound metto, ma da Piero Buscaroli, da altri che adesso non mi vengono in mente, e quando le cito potrei, se le faccio discorrendo con lei o con altri, dire vabbè, non mi ricordo adesso il testo esatto, potrebbe essere questo o quell'altro, ma dire lo ha detto, lo ha scritto, l'ho copiato, lo cito a memoria. Ma quando si scrive si ha il dovere di dire, come nel volume tale, pagine queste e quest'altre e compagnia discorrendo. E questo non succede perché i giovani intanto i giovani intendo i famosi cinquantenni ignoranti, col famoso verso di Pound che confezionai proprio per un tale che fece politica e naufragò miseramente, di nome Fini Gianfranco.
No.
Nella dedica a un libro che gli regalai appena eletto segretario del suo partito, riportai i 3 versi di Pound dal canto 13: i talenti di un neonato si rispettino dal primo vagito, ma un cinquantenne ignorante non merita rispetto alcuno. Qui siamo in presenza di una pletora di cinquantenni ignoranti che si vantano delle cose altrui. Qui bisogna essere un po' cauti. Anche quando io dovessi citare un verso dal Vangelo, per esempio, non è male se mi potrei confondere se l'evangelista è Marco, Giovanni o Luca o Matteo, ma almeno devo sentire il dovere di dire, ma è scritto nei Vangeli, e magari anche se lo riporto male, discorrendo. Quando scrivo devo andare a verificare. E invece c'è questo vezzo per il quale escono fuori le scemenze che poi si verificano. Questa mania di apparire in danno altrui con copia e incolla facili, oggi che poi è facilissimo farlo col computer, emerge e si fa la figura dei cretini. Certo, attento, non la fanno con 100 persone, perché purtroppo, di Pound specialmente, percentualmente siamo a livello del 2% che sa qualcosa.
Direi di sì.
Oltre. Però basta uno o due che dice, ma guarda, questo cialtrone dà da intendere. E si vive nell'equivoco che è quello che vige oggi. Sì, perché le cose vanno male in Italia e non solo in Italia? Perché, vede, anche oggi quando questi celebrano l'anniversario della vittoria della Prima Guerra Mondiale, non hanno il coraggio di celebrare le cose reali. Ne abbiamo fatto cenno lei ed io.
Sì,
sui
infatti,
50.000 morti sacrificati inutilmente, e bisognerebbe vedere perché.
Appunto, perché? Bella domanda.
Noi non andiamo a dire, come mi è successo l'altro giorno, ho corretto a qualcuno, ho scritto che l'8 settembre del 43 non fu dal Savoia e da Badoglio sottoscritto un armistizio, ma una resa senza condizioni, e non l'avessi mai scritto, e avendo io citato la famosa sentenza a memoria del Supremo Tribunale Militare del 1954, del 26 aprile del 54,
26 aprile,
avendo citato io quella sentenza che sanciva definitivamente la validità giuridica de facto della Repubblica Sociale Italiana, questa persona vigliacca che ha fatto? Ha cancellato quello che ho scritto io. Perché così fanno. Ma io mi diverto.
Certo.
Mi diverto e li punzecchio, deridendoli, come sto facendo in questo momento. Vede, potrebbe sembrare la mia una specie di rivalsa. No. È il chiarire determinate cose. E siccome, ritorno un attimo a Pasolini è stato anche un uomo di cinema, e per esempio io ammetto di aver visto con un certo interesse un film faticoso, Uccellacci e Uccellini, dove c'era la maestria di Totò. Poi nelle altre opere di Pasolini, alle quali ho dedicato un po' di tempo, ma ho cercato di non vederle tutte, devo fare due rilievi. Uno, perché sono stato costretto a cercare di vedere che cosa insalò, film postumo messo insieme da altri, cioè e prodotto da altri, a Pasolini ammazzato, perché abbia usato la voce in un film di falsità storiche totali, integrali,
infatti.
e di violenza,
bella domanda.
perché abbia usato la voce di Pound. Ma il grave è un altro, che risale al 1963, e ne abbiamo parlato noi, e un giorno ci ritorneremo, quando un produttore, Fattori, commise a Pasolini e a Guareschi di fare un film di montaggio intitolato La rabbia.
Sì.
E così è andato. È uscito per un giorno solo. Io ho più di una copia su disco, sul nastro, eccetera. Il secondo giorno Pasolini lo fece ritirare. Perché? Perché si sentiva schiacciato dalla... aveva tanti complessi di inferiorità, dalla genuinità di Guareschi, che aveva confezionato con lo stesso materiale di repertorio un'opera ironica e divertente, mentre Pasolini l'aveva resa pesante e noiosa. Mi creda, la parte di Pasolini non è pesante, è anche un po' noiosa, ma non è male dal mio punto di
Sì.
vista. Sa che cosa è successo? Morto Pasolini, i continuatori della memoria di Pasolini l'hanno rimessa in circolazione da sola, non dicendo il film metà di Guareschi e metà di Pasolini, come se fosse
Mi
un'opera
ricordo.
di 50 minuti e come se fosse solo roba di Pasolini.
Mi sembra
E
che uscì verso la metà degli anni 90, vero?
sì, e questo riappartiene alla mentalità servile di gente che, non avendo santi veri, non avendo eroi nel proprio Olimpo, non avendo nettezza di idee, e mi riferisco a Pound o a tutti coloro che Pound ha citato, perché ha citato tanti e tali di quei personaggi dei quali non abbiamo nemmeno idea. Quando mi cita Ferdinando nei Pisancantos, proprio nella sezione degli 11 Pisancantos, lui cita Fernando Mezzasoma, e quando cita Alessandro, non cita Alessandro Magno, come è scappato nelle note al professor Rizzardi, ma ha citato Alessandro Pavolini. Allora, come vede, i personaggi citati da Pound in questo gigantesco affastellamento di fatti storici che sono i cantos in generale, i 120 cantos, quei personaggi appartengono alla storia. Anche l'eroina di Rimini, della quale abbiamo parlato noi, quella ragazza che si offre in olocausto accompagnando gli invasori della città di Rimini in zona minata militari e immolandosi con loro. Ebbene, ci sono dei cialtroni che sostengono che l'episodio non sia accaduto. Lascio stare, non mi interessa adesso dire
Sì, è vero, ho sentito questa
eccetera,
cosa, ma
eccetera. Io ho dovuto adesso ho voluto creare, per ricordare quell'anniversario e vedere di stare entro i 30 minuti, siamo a 33-34
sì.
minuti, la nostra conversazione. Però i fatti, vede, l'epidemia che sta dannando in questo momento l'Italia e anche in parte il mondo, molto gonfiata, maltrattata, malcondotta, è la conseguenza logica di quello che si è fatto all'umanità in genere, ma anche all'ambiente. Da quando è finita la seconda guerra mondiale, dello cosiddetto ambiente nessuno ha avuto cura. Si sono andati a distruggere le foreste, si sono distrutti i ghiacciai sui monti non solo dell'Europa ma di tutto il mondo. Si è alterato quello che era l'equilibrio dell'ambiente e quindi l'ecologia, che guarda caso, l'abbiamo detto 1000 volte noi, da quel maledetto regime che è stato il fascismo, era stato inquadrato in alcune leggi, 4 delle quali andavano sotto il nome della legge Serpieri. Giorni fa ho rivisto in televisione Rai Storia, condotta da Mieli, il quale, riproponendo, e lo ripropone per la terza o quarta volta, il rapporto tra l'Italia e l'Oriente attraverso la figura dell'inventore dell'Ismeo, cioè dell'esploratore Giuseppe Tucci, ebbe a dire Paolo Mieli: ma in fondo com'è possibile che l'Italia si sia affacciata verso l'Oriente, soprattutto quello indiano, addirittura negli anni 20, mentre poi siamo negli anni 60 e 70 che viene fuori la moda, scimmiottata dai giovani, di guardare all'India e di guardare a certe tradizioni indiane. E chiese ai giovani, sì, questo i giovani hanno, i 3-4 che lo attorniavano, hanno detto, sì, è una cosa sorprendente, alla quale quel tipo d'Italia aveva pensato. E allora perché quel tipo d'Italia è stato considerato da Ezra Pound? Perché le antenne del poeta automaticamente portavano a considerare ciò che è bello. E come ha scritto Pound, il bello è difficile. Ecco perché i regimi attuali naufragano davanti a un'epidemia fessa e non trovano soluzioni e si arrendono davanti a 2 o 3 cialtroni che sparano fucilate in mezzo alla gente, perché il bello è difficile.
Sì.
E il bello, il mio pensiero in questo momento va a Piero Buscaroli, il bello che ha saputo trattare la musica e la storia della musica in una certa maniera, lo ha saputo trattare magistralmente Ezra Pound, e Piero a Pound dedicò una famosa memoria in un lungo pomeriggio, in un viaggio che andava da Ravenna fino a Ferrara e poi a Venezia. Io mi fermo qua perché siamo arrivati ai 35-40 minuti.
Molto bello il suo pensiero che ha dedicato alla fine a Piero Buscaroli, perché c'è una connessione fra Buscaroli e Ezra Pound, come lei sa, erano amici.
Notevole.
Accidenti, altro che. Lei stesso ne testimone. Insomma,
io volli che Piero venisse nell'85 a Spoleto a parlare di Pound, in quella memorabile giornata che organizzammo con grande fatica in pochi, mettendo insieme memorie anche dei futuristi e del futurismo, ma soprattutto di Ezra Pound. Tutto qua.
Grazie. Allora la ringrazio. Nel frattempo, mentre parlava, qui arrivano notizie. In America sembra che abbia vinto la parte peggiore, la peggio, ancora più peggio, diciamo, le elezioni presidenziali, quindi aspettiamoci a subire ancora il peggio del peggio che sta per arrivare.
Ma in America, guardi, è possibile tutto, perché ovviamente ci deve essere una rivalsa da parte di quello che è il sistema che loro chiamano i socialisti.
Ormai sì, sembra
ma la grande finanza è lì, va bene.
Sì, ma
ne parleremo, lasciamo stare che non è un argomento che
no, è solo per così, visto che abbiamo parlato di Pound, insomma, chissà cosa direbbe oggi Pound se fosse qui, chissà cosa direbbe, mamma mia, lasciamo stare. È meglio non pensarci. Niente, allora ringrazio il professor Pantano, le auguro una buona serata, alla prossima con argomenti, poi
le connessioni.
Io vi ringrazio molto, professor Pantano.
Chiudo tutto e sistemiamo.
Vi ringrazio e spero che presto voi pubblicate
Il
il
famoso,
libro,
eccola qua la pennetta, sto facendo l'indice,
noto libro che appunto
qua.
che
Benissimo.
qui più di una persona, anzi diverse persone mi hanno chiesto
No, ci
questo
sono anche
libro.
io, ma purtroppo vedi adesso anche
Bene,
con l'occhio che funziona male, tutte le cose mi si stanno
eh,
buttando addosso. Vabbè,
questo è appunto, è tutto qua. Quindi ci sentiamo e buona serata a tutti, grazie per la vostra partecipazione. A
a
presto.
presto, buonasera. Intanto
Buonasera,
adesso
buonasera.
chiuso,
Ezra Pound speaking. Radio Speeches of World War II. Part 1. 110 FCC recorded scripts. Number 1. October 2nd, 1941. USA 43. Last Ditch of Democracy.
It's a ditch, all right. Democracy has been licked in France. The frogs were chucked into war against the will of the people. Democracy has been licked to a frazzle in England, where it never did get a look in anyhow. But even pseudo-democracy breaks down when a people is chucked into war against its will, and the Brits never voted Winston into the premiership. In fact, when did they have an election? Remember, it is the government in England that decides when to have an election. Think where we would be if Mr. Roosevelt could merely postpone elections till he got ready to have one. Well, democracy is in her last ditch, and if she ain't saved in America, no one is going to save her in her parliamentary form. As to uniting with England, taking on a lot of bad debts and bad liabilities, one of the speakers on this radio was kind enough, that is, he showed respect enough for American intelligence. Yes, even today he showed respect for American intelligence by saying only Britons were rooting for this federation. On close examination, the Brits themselves don't seem to be so numerous in the movement toward merger. Ora Belisha, or Belisha. Well, is he English? And Victor Sassoon, all for the merger. 20% capital to be paid by the English. 20% paid capital to be paid by the United States of America. The balance of 60%, unpaid, to remain in the hands of the promoters, probably as preferred stock, with board of directors ready to grant special bonuses to their friends at any and every moment. Well, is Vic Sassoon, that Jew pseudo-Parsi, head of the Shanghai rackets, opium, brothels, improbability, and so forth, night life of Shanghai, is he your idea of David Copperfield and Mr. Pickwick and Mr. Strite? And of course there are millions behind it. Any one of 86 Jew millionaires can start a publishing firm, and any one of the 4,000 hired troops in the British Embassy can print all the crap he likes. I don't know where the rugged American individual is going to find funds to combat him, but on the other hand, you can annex Canada without taking on liabilities. You can annex Newfoundland and Jamaica and all the rest of it without either paying England or paying Victor. Why this 60% to promoters who will do nothing for you? Yes, I know there is all the Sulgrave Manor association, all the glamour of cousinship, but it was cousinship with John Bull in the old days, not with Bull Isha or Bull Stein. And Bull Stein is apparently itching to drop off the B and remain simple Bullstein by means of the merger. The military situation, conducting to union, the number of troops that can be supported and fed and supplied by one line of railway from Archangel, from Vladivostok, or via Tehran, is considerably less than the 12 million which the Russians set out with. The Slavic fatalism which induced these troops to die in large numbers has in this war appeared quite alien to the sensibilities of the fighting force put in the field by Mr. Churchill and Mr. Belisha. I don't see even Winston inventing an election system. I mean, Timothy Atkins won't shoot Tommy Atkins in the back on system. He would feel something after doing it once. Doubtless Belisha, bright eye, and invigorating, etc., will one day suggest that the Aussies could shoot the Sepoys, and as the Bathans enjoy shooting anything, and would enjoy shooting Australians, especially if invited to do so. And doubtless there could be found an even super-Slavic fatalism somewhere among the 1,000 alien races crushed by the Anglo-Jew Empire, but it mightn't take a very active military form. It might just sit down with a hand loom in face of the carnage. But in any case, it's a question of quantity, and what support does the United States get from Anglo-Judea? Just whom have the British supported in this so bloody series of swindles? They have every reason not to waste their forces in enforcing American trade in the Orient. They have every reason to leave America to pin up the diapers of their baby, except, of course, the feeling that the United States might take a leaf out of their book and grab this or that, as they have grabbed French possessions and shot off the remaining French combatants. In Persia it becomes a question of quantity. Walla Walla, etc. 12 million Russians did not stop Van Rundstedt and Baron Keitel. They have not stopped one German army, nor have they reduced the German forces to a figure anywhere near the number of troops that England could maintain with 6 railways over the Caucasus. So that is not exactly where the strategists expect you to help England win any wars. Whatever Growler or Mr. McGrump says on the BBC Liary. Now, when I was a kid, Admiral Dewey, that sounds like Napoleon at Moscow. Yes, that sounds to me like the story about the fifth element, mud, said Napoleon. There are millions of Chinamen, many of them living on very short rations in the interior, and about as much interested in Chiang Kai-shek as they are in the White Sox and the Phillies, if there still are any Phillies. You could get more enthusiasm out of those Chinks for a hot dog championship on the north side than you could for Chiang Foreign Party in China. A lot of China is not pro-Kai-shek. A lot of China is not for that gang of foreign investors. Then of course you might rescue the de Gaulle interests. Namely, you might go die in the glorious cause of the Bank of the Paris Union, against General Pétain, the victor of Verdun. Do you think the French people would thank you? Listen to the French radio, that is, not paid by London, and ask me. Yes, the Vichy radio is twisty. It is trying to hold on to France and double across the Axis, and hold on to France, and hold or get every inch of French soil, and hang on to every French sou it can lay eye or hold on. But it is not working for the Famille de Gaulle, and it knows that Winston wanted Paris razed to the ground as was Rotterdam, and as Leningrad either is being or has been. And Pierce Laval was about all that stopped Winston from attaining that so desired result, because we as lenders of money would be able to intervene and lend money for reconstruction. A lovely ambition, but will any born Frenchman thank you for exercising that at this moment? Will any Frenchman thank you for exercising that kind of ambition? The French peasant wants his field for himself. He has a healthy mistrust of all mortgages. As to the data whereon the American government bases its judgment, I believe they still call it judgment. Roosevelt is reported in the Herald Tribune of New York on August 17th as being in complete agreement with Winston Churchill and saying Russia could fight all winter. Maybe he meant that Siberia could remain outside German protection during that period. He did go so far as saying that events had delayed his meeting with England's public enemy number 3. That was something, but not quite enough to win the Ukraine campaign. He might have told you that the events in Russia had delayed my getting the Japan Times. Copy for June 19th has just come. I suppose it was sitting at Kiev to get through. One Jap writer at that time allowed, like, as if Franklin was getting you folks into the war, but it didn't look to me as if he thought it was an act of idealism. He didn't confuse it with saving democracy. In the meantime, do I look at Belicia's Anglo-Saxon face as reproduced in PM and other organs of similar nature? That is what the American branch of Sulgrave Manor Association is asked to unite with.
End of number 1. Ezra Pound speaking radio speeches of World War II. Ezra Pound speaking radio speeches of World War II, edited by Leonard W. Dube. Number 2. October 26th, 1941, USA 47, Books and Music. Europe calling, Ezra Pound speaking. Mr. Churchill, even Mr. Churchill hasn't had the brass to tell the American people why he wants them to die to save what. He is fighting for the gold standard and monopoly, namely the power to starve the whole of mankind and make it pay through the nose before it can eat the fruit of its own labor. His gang, whether kike, Gentile, or hybrid, is not fit to govern, and the English ought to be the only people ass enough and brute enough to fight for him. Now, as to my personal habits, the few of you who know that I exist know that I have given most of my time to mugging up culture, that I have read a few books and spent my spare time trying to learn musical composition, or else playing tennis and floating around the Gulf of Tigulio, in which act I make, so far as I know, a nuisance of myself to no one whatever. And in the mornings I write letters to and read letters from the most intelligent of my contemporaries, and Mr. Churchill and that brute Rosefield and their kike postal spies and obstructors, Kikerian and or others annoy me by cutting off my normal mental intercourse with my colleagues. But I am not going to starve. I am not going to starve mentally. The culture of the Occident came out of Europe, and a lot of it is still right here in Europe, and I don't mean archaeology either. So a few weeks ago, Menotti says, "Ever read Piers Moscardino?" So I've read it. And for the first time in your colloquator's life, he was tempted to translate a novel, and did so. 10 years ago, I had seen Enrico Pia passing along the sea front, and Gino Saviotti says, "It's a novelist." Having seen and known Poland Idean, some hundreds or probably thousands, I was not interested in its being a novelist. But the book must be good, or I wouldn't be more convinced of the fact after having translated it than I was before. Of course, my act was impractical so far as you are concerned. I haven't the ghost of an idea how I am to get the manuscript to America or get it published. Pia has never made a cent out of the original. Well, neither had Joyce nor Eliot when I started trying to get someone to print them. What is it like? Well, if Tom Hardy had been born a lot later and lived in the hills up back of Lunigiana, which is down along the coast here, and if Hardy hadn't writ what old Fordy used to call that sort of small-town paper journaliste, and if a lot of other things, including temperament, had been different, and so forth, that might have been something like Pia's writing, which I repeat is good writing, and was back in 1921 when Mascaradino was printed. Mascaradino is the name of the kid who is telling about his grandpop, a nickname like Buck. As soon as the barriers are down, I shall be sending a copy along for the enlightenment of the American public. In the meantime, if anyone wants to learn how to write Italian, let him read the first chapter of Forastiero, or the couple of pages on the bloke who had been 20 years in jail. This is just announcing that Italy has a writer, and it is some time since I told anybody and that any country on earth had a writer, like Confucius, knocked around and done all sorts of jobs. Writes like a man who could make a good piece of mahogany furniture. I sent in a hurry call from the Siena Music Week, but I reckon it was too late. Not time to get retransmittal, but I wanted the clean and decent Americans to hear the Vivaldi oratorio Giuditta Triumphans, which makes old Pop Handel look like a cold poached egg, what somebody dropped on the pavement. Of course it's not that kind of oratorio. It is a musical whoop in 2 parts, to celebrate the retaking of Corfu from the Turks in 1715, and it was very timely and suitable as a bicentenary funeral wreath on redhead Vivaldi. I got it once from the top center and once in a box hanging over the orchestra, once for the whole and once for the details. And I think it's okay, brother. You'd have to hear it alternate with Johnny Bach, say the Matthias 7 times over. At least I would, before I would think I was ready to say just how good it is. There has been some good Vivaldi done for orchestra over Rome radio, but I don't know whether it has been short-waved over to America. There was some good Vivaldi done 2 years ago, when the Chigi organization had the sense to devote the whole of the Sienese fest to Vivaldi. But the Giuditta is one up on that, better than the Olympiad, as then presented. In fact, I think it is better built as a whole, and you don't have to be annoyed by ginks walking about and doing stage acting. Well, some people like their music with that distraction. When you stop shooting and stop pilling a profit for kikes by conveying their guns to the goddamned English, who ought to be spanked and put to bed by their nurses, you might be able to come over and hear it. That would be a saner way of passing the time than doubling your taxes and being robbed by the American Treasury. God, my God, you folks are dumb. Now, as to criticism of the Giuditta, I affirm that Vivaldi knew more about using the human voice than Johnny Bach ever discovered. That may sound like heresy. Well, you decide after you have listened to both of them. And I affirm that Tony Vivaldi knocks the spots off of Handel. I got no doubt on that point whatsoever. Very nice bit for viola d'amore, and naturally it pleases me on account of a kink I had before I knew Vivaldi had done it. I have a high opinion of Rossini and Mozart, that is, use of mandolins in serious orchestra. So has everyone who ain't stark-raving goofy. But Mozart, when he came down to Italy, did not set the public crazy. And a part of the reason was, as I conjecture, that the Italian had then had an earful of Tony Vivaldi. That is guesswork, but there are things to set against Bach. In fact, things Bach took hold of and rearranged without, as I think, improving them. I had a chance to hear both together 2 years ago in Siena, in a good orchestral concert, one up to Casella, the way that program was built. A man named Guarnieri conducting, been doing 3 years now in Siena, at this summer fest. And I would, by God, rather hear Guarnieri conducting Vivaldi than hear Toscanini conducting Beethoven in Salzburg, an idea which occurred to me during the Judith performance. I try to tell you that Italy is carrying on la rivoluzione continua. This is the kind of thing Italians go on doing, despite that dirty mugged bleeder and betrayer of his allies, Winston Babyface Churchill, and his gangsters. Those blighters have never done one damn thing for civilization. They have rotted their country, and should not be allowed to rot anyone else's. They didn't start the process of corruption, but they have been, every one of them, for it all day and every day, and for the 24-hour period. De Marzio is running a paper. Beccari is running a monthly devoted to the narrative nothing, but narrative or careful discussion of narrative, and how one should do it. Over in Barcelona, they're printing a series, Poesia and La Mario, bilingual edition of everyone from Villon to Mallarmé and Rilke, and I am told your present colloquiator if they can get anyone to translate me. Europe is an organic body. Its life continues. Its life has components, and nearly every damn thing that has made your lives worth living up to this moment has had its origins right here in Europe. Yes, we had some colonial architecture and 30 pages of Whitman, Walt Whitman, not White Man, and then Whistler, and Henry James left the country. In fact, it warn't no bed of roses for authors and painters, though my generation alias thought we ought to plant something or other and try to get a new crop of something or other. The idea of the returning native was prevalent, except possibly to Thomas S. Eliot, who saw from the start that you folks weren't Episcopal enough to suit his Episcopal temperament, and he somewhat looked down on my pagan and evangelical tendencies. Well, frankly, I always thought it would be a good thing to come back and put some sort of a college or university in shape to teach the young something, not merely the goddamned sawdust and substitutes for learning and literature they get handed. However, go hold up the whole course of civilization. If you want to line up with boneheads, you will line up with boneheads, and you will go on having conductors instead of composers and European authors who have resigned. But don't get that Anglican attitude of the old story storeroom in a channel called by the English Channel, the straits between Calais and Dover, and the 30 old times out with a headline, Continent Isolated. Nobody here is laying flowers on the tomb of Columbus, not this year. But don't go and run away with the idea that Europe is no longer here, or that books aren't being written. I mean being written, and that we have no painters or writers or musicians. I regret the personal correspondence of a small number of writers who mostly don't write to each other, and I would like to see what Hilaire is painting, and to get Comrade Cummings' last set of verses, or to go on getting Catasono's Japanese magazine. But I ain't getting weak and tiddling, or going into a pronounced and delicate melancholy for the extinction of all human intercourse. End of number 2. Books and Music. Ezra Pound speaking. Radio Speeches of World War II.
Ezra Pound speaking. Radio Speeches of World War II. Number 3. November 4th, 1941. USA 51. The Golden Wedding. The sight of elderly wedded couples dwelling in mutual devotion sometimes impels one to think of their early loves. In the present case, the spectacle of Mr. Churchill's government wedded to Stalin's and Mr. Roosevelt's inviolable word mixed into it. In short, this triangular Darby and Joan of the three hybridized governments leads one to look back at the forgotten incidents of their courtship. In particular, the love feasts between our American Reds and Moscow in vita beatific contemplation. Our idealists loved Moscow while Mr. Churchill was still playing the bashful swain. In fact, he was scowling at Stalin, and from the incomprehension of his eternal love for the Muscovites, he was being not only sulky, but insulting. So with true love, never, never, never would he come and kiss the Russian Joan under the sickle and mistletoe. Our own American trade unionists were more oncoming. They liked the bud of Russian promise. Reference Workers' Library number 3, bearing the dim and lavender date, September 9th, 1927. J. Lovestone, nee possibly Liebstein, on the first page of Amorous Paean inscribes the luminous words, quote, "the establishment of the 7-hour day in Russia," unquote. Well, that's far off enough and long enough before these Stockhelevites. And Mr. Lovestone is very hard on the American Federation of Labor. Quote, "reactionary trade union bureaucrats," unquote, he calls them. And in that memorable day and year, our dewy-eyed workers, trade unionists and idealists, technical advisors, they figure in the catalogue. Brophy, R.W., Dunn, C.H. Douglas, Tex Tugwell, Stuart, Chase, a lot, as you see, of brawny fellows who had used either the hammer or sickle in daily life, went over to visit the comrade. And apart from the general, as opposed to the specific nature of the answers, the comrade didn't do so bad, the questions being rather more nebulous and unspecific than the answers. How could the debonair murderer get down very near to the brass tacks in his answers? After all, Marx was pretty good at history and diagnosis. Nobody on the Axis side denies that Marx discovered several genuine faults in the usury system. All we ask is a way to cure 'em. And the torture chambers in most countries where Stalin's power has reached, and in a few embassies where he had been unable to get control of the total police force,
rather indicate that the Bolshevik system never got universal approval from its victims. However, when next dining with Rabbi Lehman, Oslo and Moshatha, and the rest of the international bankers, spring a few pages of the comrades' answers between the caviar and the pheasant, and see if it don't enliven the dinner. Sure, Stalin approves of Marx and Engels wanting to take economic, political, cultural, and organizational measures, and seem, as he put 'em, in that order, you would expect me to fall for it. Economic first. Of course, the Bolsheviks didn't. Any part that comes into power probably puts organizational measures first, and the economics belong, alas, to the almost inaccessible part of culture. So few people seem able to grasp simple economics without, as Senator Bankhead remarked, about 3 centuries delay. 3 centuries to get people to understand anything about anything having to do with money. And it is now demonstrated on the corpus vilius of British reformers' hopes that very little economic reform gets into practice without precedent organizational and political measures of an almost earth-shaking nature. A curious phrase about reconstruct capitalist society must belong to the translator. I don't want to pin that on Joseph, though maybe that was part of his muddle. I am far less concerned with Joe's lacunae than with a few clear, positive statements. Joe said he was aware that a number of capitalist governments are controlled by big banks, notwithstanding the existence of democratic parliaments. Not bad for a Georgian assassin, and possibly several decades ahead of the American public and professoriate. Not a single power in which the cabinet can be formed in opposition to the will of the big financial magnates. I wonder, is that why they took Joe for a ride? It is sufficient to exert financial pressure to cause cabinet ministers to fall from their posts as if they were stunned. Joey was talking of European cabinets, not of the so very different American democracy, as they call it, etc., where, unless there is absolute surety that financial pressure won't be used, the blighters seldom or never get in. Joe said that the control of the government by money bags is inconceivable and absolutely excluded in the USSR. How different from the home life of our democracy, as they call it, etc. And how different from anything any British politician has ever encountered, and how different from any state of things that Churchill's group would desire. Narrow circle, said Joe, of individuals connected in one way or another with the large banks, and because of that they strive to conceal the part they play in this from the people. What a perfect ally for Churchill, Morgenthau, Lehman, and the present Anglo-Jewish regimes. Well, the starry-eyed Mr. Tugwell and the cautious Mr. Chase and Mr. Maurer and Brophy took it all down hook, line, and sinker. 7 hours a day and the rest of it. It was a stirring occasion. The only thing is that the idealists' ideals have got going so much faster and gone so much further. The Axis side of the present hard feelings. Here the trade unions, with their syndic organization and their recognized legal status whereby they propose formulate and get what they want in Italy is really of so much more interest for any member of any trade union, or for any leader of labour who cares a hang about the welfare of the lead, that one only hopes the American trade unionist will someday read Poor, or at least to read something about Italian organizational measures. The Stalin interview is a tough piece of reading, very hard to take hold of. That was probably the secret of his hold. Plenty of people who know Russia have been puzzled by the gap between their effective propaganda and their local failure in solving human problems. I believe the human material they had to work on explains part of the latter. I mean, they did not make a paradise, but mostly a sweatshop, machines before men, men as material, but the other side of the devilish efficiency of their propaganda is worth study, and it seems to be a variant of the old political wheeze of sticking to general statements that each auditor interprets to mean what he would mean if he said it. And now for contrast, close harmony, let us look at a recent emission from Joe's faithful companion, fellow idealist and pledged ally, Mr. N.M. Butler. On June 3rd, 1941, year current, as delivered at the commencement of Columbia University, when old Nick was awaitin' another Waterloo, and as is common with his kind, he wasn't puttin' it in the first person singular. Nick wanted Americans to go fight for the British exploiters, so he said, the world, etc., in this case the world, meaning Nick and his paymasters. The world, he says, awaits another Waterloo, and on the 5th page it turns out he meant a defeat of Hitler, which might be called metonymy, or taken a part of the whole, and not the better whole either. Now the world, as any college president ought to know before the trustees pay him his fat annual salary, is spherical in form, and is composed of more than one continent, and not wholly and totally enraptured with the big usury central. However, let Nick Butler speak for himself, as he has never failed to do in all his oleaginous lifetime. Several pages of the old scamp's palaver contain statements by which no right-thinking man would be offended. The slabs of print, the page undivided by paragraph divisions, tends to lull the reader or auditor into security. Mr. Butler even disapproves, mildly of course, of the controlling desire for gain, alias our old enemy, the profit motive. Of course, he keeps off the specific means of gain exercised by his owners. He then pays a delicate compliment to Lord Hollyfox, without committing himself. In fact, nothing could be more downy. The first Lord Halifax, unaided by his charming and formidable lady, said there were 300 years ago many things that riches cannot buy. Therefore the American boys should bleed for the present Lord Hollyfox. Now old Nick don't go as far back as all that. He stops back in the 17th century, before Robert Cecil was so vigorous in defence of the British opium interests in Shanghai. Victory for a moral ideal is not enough, according to Nicholas, because the gain-seeking interest has control of so vast a proportion of mankind. That is true enough, but it ain't reduced the moral ideal to absolute impotence. This is what was worrying Butler, but he hadn't got down to bedrock. He said there was a time back apparently when Mark Hanna was running the United States of America, when the moral ideal was to all appearances gaining ground. Of course, if by that he means that some empires were gaining territory, he might have said so, only he didn't. Old Nicholas puts the rise of the triumph, real or apparent, the ideal, from the McKinley to the Wilson administration. Note of hope and progress. In 1910, the American Congress was unanimous for the moral principle, so long as no questions were asked about the privileges of the usury central. Nick complains that the moral ideal has disappeared in all that has to do with international relations, which shows the state of deep ignorance in the world, as distinct from Nicholas Butler's circle or pot. And looking at dates, he must have been blurbing this blurb the same week that a Chinaman, not of Wang Qing-Wai's party, but of Chiang Kai-shek's party, and faithful to Chiang, saying what Hitler's justice in scuttling international affairs was such that the Chinese of the anti-Jap, anti-Wang party might accept Hitler's arbitrage. Mr. Butler then seems to fall into incoherence. He talks of a pledge as something to be kept. What price England, Churchill, and Roosevelt? He objects to having the savings of generations swept away. He asks what has become of the influence of and guidance of the great religion, Christian, Mosul, Hebrew, and Buddhist, Emagora, of Plato, Aristotle, St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, leaving out St. Ambrose and St. Antonio da Frenza, and graciously waving a hand to the captains of the mind. Spanish, Italian, French, English, German, and of course Abraham Lincoln, not quoting old Abe on the currency issue, and then barbarous brutality without mention of Estonia, Finland, or places occupied by the busting of churches and museums. What price Louvain and Cyrenaica, and all this, however dark the skies, etc., ends up with a historic parallel. The world waiting for a new Waterloo because Napoleon Bonaparte went into Russia, and if Hitler ain't licked in Europe, it will come in Asia or Africa. Well, that is a bad slip, because Knox and Stimson, etc., are retching for to rape Africa. But at any rate, you get a picture of Nicholas and Melonimy, or taken apart for the whole. A figure of rhetoric, says Sam Johnson, whereby one word is put for another. Now, if Butler, the old goof, wants me to give him a clean bill of health, he can use the enormous power conferred on him by his position to get Columbia University to issue a series of volumes containing the GISL of the beliefs and knowledge of John Adams, Jefferson, Jackson, Van Buren, and Lincoln, and OL leaving out every phrase and paragraph which I, and men like me, consider vital to the understanding of American history. End of number 3, The Golden Wedding. Ezra Pound speaking, Radio Speeches of World War II. Ezra Pound speaking, Radio Speeches of World War II. Number 4. November 6th, 1941, U.S. 56. This War on Youth on a Generation. A consignment of the unpopular American magazines has reached me. I don't mean doctrinal magazines, but magazines in which a serious article occasionally appears. Thus I have learned that Professor T.A. Richards, one of England's few respectable highbrows in America, is lecturing, yes, naturally, lecturing. And apparently the normal effort to keep things going goes on. Wallace Stevens, J.G. Fletcher, old Doc Williams and Cumrad Cummings, knowing a bit more about writing than the younger men who haven't quite made up their minds whether they want to do a real job of work and learn how. And a man with a Scotch front name married a gal who would appear from the nomenclature to be Scotch, Welsh, and British. And Ted Spencer has got his Dancing Man into print where it ought to be, and the objections to it are silly, as one would expect them to be. And maybe the young are coming on, as Mr. Calder Joseph and Langston Hughes has a book in press, probably out by now, which is alias a good thing. And Dr. Goggerty and Gogarly, better known to the outer world as Buck Mulligan, has got to New Jersey and keeps writing poems and is accused of being engaged on a novel. He has written a rather fine ode for the revival of the Lyaltine Games, Irish Olympics. I don't quite know why it is only published now, as the Lyaltine Olympics were restored nearly 20 years ago. Well, that's a human touch and a relief from the noise of the American papers. We need more communication between the 5 continents. And some of the younger professors appear not to have been wholly hoodwinked by propaganda, got tired of Georgian poets and so forth. And that brings me to the question of age. Can you or can you not see that this war is a war against youth? That there is in England a whole generation or 2 generations ready to vomit at the mention of Churchill, Beaverbrook, Garvin, and Baldwin, and these senilities want vengeance for the lack of respect? Back in the other war, W.B. Yeats said of the old politicians, "War, of course they want war. They want all the young gals for themselves." And in one way or another, lust for power, lust, jealousy of the next generation, pretended anxiety for the world as it will be in the time of their grandchildren, hurry for fear they won't be able to kill off the present younger generation before the ideas of my generation go into effect. It is not necessary to have the earth ruled by senile bleeders and swindlers. The youth of Europe has discovered that cardinal fact. Hence the senile outcry, Europa delenda, Europa. Europe, according to the Financial News of London, must be wiped out, or certain monopolies will disappear. Men will be able to eat the grain of their own fields, unless Europe is blown to flinders. Have you read the details of British blackmail on Chile? On the men in Chile who want to trade with the outer world, details of Rosenstein's freedom of the seas. Navicert, that was what they tried on Italy, and Italy came in on the German side. If Chile don't, that merely means that every man in Chile who is blackmailed into signing those papers will store up a silent hate against everything English and against any nation that participates in such a policy. Starve 'em out. Will you separate the starvers from the producers, the growers from the makers? Look at Hank Wallace, good guy, nice presence, led down one garden path after another. Perfect Hampton Court maze, Lord Halifax. First you are asked to reduce production, plough under, then after a few years you are threatened with rationing. Rationing! In the United States of America, the land of abundance, the land the Loeb chart showed beyond any possible shadow of doubt whatsoever to be the land of abundance, every family of 4 could have had then a standard of living equal to what then cost $4,000 a year. Needed monetary reform, of course, had to have honest national money to get it. The United States of America needed internal reform, not a war in Africa or in Asia, not a war for the mine owners against the farmers of Rhodesia, not a war for the opium of Shanghai and Singapore. From internal reform could have come collaboration with the other 4 continents, and freedom of the seas, the kind that will permit Chile and the Argentine to trade with France, Spain, and Sweden, and Switzerland, and will let all Hoover tote food into Belgium. Will you look at the age of the chief war pimps? Roosevelt now says he saw war coming in 1937. In 1937, there was no necessity of war. Roosevelt did all he could to make it inevitable. There is no record of any single act of Roosevelt aimed sincerely at staving off war. Ignorance of Europe, government in charge of Hicks, all the outer world thinks Roosevelt took orders from the worst gang in Europe. Don't say I affirm that he did. What I affirm is that he never showed the faintest inclination to learn the facts and come out for a just solution. That is a fairly conservative statement. He has never been neutral. But get down to this one point of age. How old are these blokes who are trying to throw America into the conflict? What is their business? What is their civic record? What is, or ever has been, their desire to let you get the facts? Have any of them ever come out for the just price, which is basic in all economics? Even the old laissez-faire or Whig economics believed at the start that free competition led to the just price. The wheeze against it was worked partly by faking the freedom of that competition. If you start a 10 years war, yes, if you start a 10 years war, none of these old swine will be there at the end of it. It won't be their world. It may be your ruin. As to ruin, what about Petrograd? No military purpose in its destruction. Laval saved Paris. Churchill would have had lay Paris flat to gain 3 days' time that would have had no effect whatsoever on the result of the German campaign in France. What causes that? Criminality? Imbecility? Or what Napoleon would have called lack of imagination, meaning incapacity to form a picture in the mind's eye of what the total destruction of Paris would mean. Those of you who want to see Paris again will owe it to Pierre Laval, whom the British tried to have murdered. Those of you who ever do see Paris either for the first time or again will not owe it to Mr. Churchill. Had that criminal ape got his way, there would have been absolutely no Paris there. Yes, we were once young or younger, and many of us fell for the Russian Red Revolution, because the Marxist diagnosis was pretty near right. The remedy did not work, and the revolution was betrayed. Another revolution, a youth, has not been betrayed. It is moving toward what the decent Reds wanted. A lot of them saw no further, wanted no more than the end of certain abuses. The fools got control. Now you are not communists. The United States of America and France and every other nation east of the Volga wants the homestead. The French peasant wants his own bit of land, without the dead hand over him, without mortgage. The working man does not want to govern, he wants good government. You Americans and the English want government to be good without any effort on your part whatsoever. You don't even look at what is done by your governments, take an awful heave to get any of your attention turned onto the vital facts of a government policy. Most men want certain things in their own lives, largely in or inside the sphere of their own trade or business. Very few analyze that want or carry their thought through into the realization of what they want with a practical system of government. Our system was okay for the open and unsettled continent, etc. The frontier. Individualism is a state of things where man who couldn't stand on his own feet in the forest and live on the plain and live possibly on horseback merely died off. First intellectual reaction to mere approach of industrialization, Thoreau tried to see how little he need bother about other humanity. Amateur move. Cohabitation with other men, polis, a city, politics, right way for people to live together in a city. Greek cities very small, Aristotle bothering about a system for 5,000 citizens, etc. 5 million, 130 million, bit more of a job, better regulations needed. Great swindle, money issue, the exchangeable measured titles to goods. As our Constitution got well out in front, was for more than a century, in fact for 130 years, far and away the best on earth. I had always thought we could get all the social justice we need by a few sane reforms of money, such as Adams and Lincoln would have thought honest and constitutional. The grafters would rather throw you into a 10 years war and kill off 5 or 10 million young men than even let the discussion of monetary reform flower on the front pages of the American papers. What causes that? Dirtiness causes it. Greed, lust, avarice, petty vindictiveness, and senile swank cause it. Europe, with systems of government less modern than ours, Germany and Italy, with the leftovers of earlier centuries, especially Germany, saw revolutions, worked out a new system suited to Europe. It is not our American affair. We could with honor advocate freedom of the seas for Europe as well as for a few Jew-controlled shipping firms. We could with honor advocate natural commerce. That is, a commerce wherein each nation would exchange what it has in superfluity or abundance, with what other nations can or will spare. We could stand for that sort of commerce instead of trying to throttle it. Why do we not? Why should all men under 40 be expected to die or be maimed in support of flagrant injustice, monopoly, and a dirty attempt to strangle and starve out 30 nations? For whom? It is not even for the people of England, to whom a 10 years' war means death by starvation. End of number 4. This War on Youth, on a Generation. Ezra Pound speaking, Radio Speeches of World War II. Ezra Pound speaking, Radio Speeches of World War II, edited by Leonard W. Doob. Number 5, December 7th, 1941, U.S. and U.K., A66. Those parentheses. Europe calling, Pound speaking, Ezra Pound speaking, and I think I am perhaps still speaking a bit more to England than to the United States of America, but you folks may as well hear it. They say an Englishman's head's made of wood, and the American head made of watermelon. Easier to get something into the American head, but nigh impossible to make it stick there for 10 minutes. Of course, I don't know what good I am doing, I mean, what immediate good, but something you folks on both sides of the wretched ocean will have to learn, war or no war, sooner or later. Now, what I had to say about the state of mind in England in 1919, I said in my cantos 14 and 15. Some of your theosophists and fancy thinkers would have called it the spiritual state of England. I am content to say state of mind. I can't say my remarks were heeded. I thought I had got 'em simple enough. words short and simple enough. In fact, some people complained that several of them contained no more than 4 or 5 letters, some less. Now I hold no Catholic has ever been or ever will be puzzled by what I said in those cantos. I have, however, never asked for sympathy when misunderstood. I go on trying to make my meaning clear and then clearer, and in the long run people who listen to me, very few do, but members of that small and select minority, do no more in the long run than those who listen to Mr. H.G. Chubby Wells and the liberal stooges. What I am getting at is, a friend said to me the other day that he was glad I had the politics I have got, but that he didn't understand how I, as a North American United Stateser, could have it. Well, that looks simple to me. Things often do look simple to me. On the Confucian system, that is, you start right and then go on, start at the root and move upward. The pattern often is simple, whereas if you start constructing from the twig downward, you get into a muddle. My politics seem to me simple. My idea of a state or an empire is more like a hedgehog or a porcupine, chunky and well defended. I don't cotton to the idea of my country being an octopus, weak in the tentacles and suffering from stomach ulcers and chronic gastritis. I wish Brother Hoover had spilled his facts about the stinking and rotten Treaty of Versailles while he still was in the White House, but I am glad he has done so now, though he could also confess his own errors and aid even now to accelerating the United States of America welfare. Anyhow, I have in principle no objection to the U.S. absorbing Canada and the whole North American continent. The rot of the British Empire is from inside, and if the whole of that syphilitic organization, headed by Montagu, Skinner, Norman, makes war on Canada or Alberta, I see no reason for Canada not making war on the Jews in London, whether they are born Jews or have taken to Jewry by predilection. What I am ready to fight against is having ex-European Jews making another peace worse than Versailles, with a new 24 Danzigs, namely the United States being left with war baby bases in Aberdeen, Singapore, Dakar, South Africa, and the Indian Ocean, all dragging the tail of their coat and making dead mathematically sure of another war for DuPont, Vickers, Mund, Melchett, Beit, Ellerman, in 10 or 15 years after the present war. And to that end, Roosevelt, Morgenthau, Lehman are working day and night, not to mention the Warburgs. And precisely on the subject of Warburgs, I wish Herb Hoover would say more about the stink of Versailles. God knows I have loathed Woody Wilson, and I don't want to see more evil done to humanity than was done by Woodrow Codface. And the sooner all America and all England wake up to what the Warburgs and Roosevelt are up to, the better for the next generation, and this one. And as an American, I do not want to see my country annihilating the population of Iceland, as the British annihilated the Maoris. And as for the Australians, they deserve a Nippo-Chinese invasion. Criminals were their granddads, and their contribution to civilization is not such as to merit even a Jewish medal. Why the heck the Chinese and Japs don't combine and derive that dirt out of Australia and set up a bit of civilization in those parts is for me part of the mystery of the Orient. And in any case, I do not want my compatriots from the ages of 20 to 40 to go get slaughtered to keep up the Sassoon and other British Jew rackets in Singapore and in Shanghai. That is not my idea of American patriotism. We are getting on for the centenary of the Opium War. That never did any good to the lads of Lancashire or of Sussex, and that brought no prosperity in Dorset or Gloucester. Hardy's England, aye, sir, where is it? Did Rothschild save it? He did not. Did the goldsmiths save it? He did not. Does Churchill endeavour to save it? He does not. I repeat, the rot and stink of England and the danger to her empire is inside, and has been from the time of Kobe. And no number of rabbis and bank touts in Wall Street and in Washington can do one damn thing for England save let her alone. And the damn pity they didn't start doing sooner. That is a pity for England. And a peace with American war bases all over the whole of the planet would be no more a real peace than Versailles was. And as to all visible signs, Roosevelt is more in the Jews' hands than Wilson was in 1919. I'm against having him mixing into any post-war matters whatever, this objection being academic. And I think it would be well for all men from China to Cape Town to see as soon as possible what Franklin is up to. Let him keep his paws on the North American continent, even if it means diminished gun sales for all his pals and for all gold bugs. 8 years ago he was saying, "Nothing to fear but fear." Well, what has become of that, Roosevelt? What has he done for 3 years but tried to work up a hysteria on that basis? He got his face into a paper called Life, 8 or 10 photographs. Jim Farley would have been less nuisance in the White House than snob Delano, who objected to Farley not on moral or ethical grounds, but purely as snobism, didn't want a mere henchman to succeed him. And as to American labor, when will American labor start looking into the currency question? Quote, question, unquote. Of course there ought not to be any interrogative element in it. Even a hod carrier ought to be able to learn why interest paying debt is not so good a basis for money as is productive labor. But will they? Will the American hod carrier and skilled engineer, including Mr. Hoover, ever get round to the currency issue? I call it issue, not question. And will the American big employer or financier, except Baruch, ever start studying the solution of his problem, which is a corporate solution, in the sense of that word now current in Europe? A corporate problem or issue, which does not mean starving the workman or breaking him up by scab mobs. Lord knows I don't see how America can have fascism without years of previous training. Looks to me even now as if the currency problem was the place to start saving America, as I have been saying for some time back. Call it 10 years or call it 20. At this moment it looks like as if John Lewis would take just as long to get round about feeding my books to his troops as it would take the Harvard faculty to get Mr. William G. Morse's permission to use him in Harvard Economics Department. Both sides will have to come to it. End of number 5. Those parentheses. Ezra Pound speaking. Radio speeches of World War II. Ezra Pound speaking. Radio speeches of World War II. Number 6. January 29th, 1942. U.S. A1. On resuming. On Pearl Arbor Day, at 12 o'clock noon, I retired from the capital of the old Roman Empire to Rapallo to seek wisdom from the ancients. I wanted to figure things out. I had a perfectly good alibi. If I wanted to play things safe, I was and am officially occupied with a new translation of the Tatsu of Confucius. I have in Rapallo the text of Confucius and of Mencius, the text of the world's finest anthology, namely that which Confucius compiled from earlier authors, and I have in reach the text of a book which bears on its front page the title Li Qi, which the head of the Chinese department of our Congressional Library tells me proper-minded Chai sinologues now think is pronounced Li Ji. And I have 6 volumes of the late Dr. Morrison's dictionary, not the most up-to-date dictionary of Chinese ideograms, but nevertheless good enough. That is, I have work there for some years if I don't die before I get to the middle. The odes are to me very difficult. They are of extreme beauty. Thousands of poets have looked at those odes and despaired. There are points at which some simple ideogram, that is, Chinese picture word, is so used as to be eternal, insofar as our human sense of eternity can reach. There is one of the sunrise that I despair of ever getting translated. There was, to face this, the situation. That is to say, the United States had been for months illegally at war through what I considered to be the criminal acts of a president whose mental condition was not, as far as I could see, all that could or should be desired of a man in so responsible a position or office. He had, so far as evidence available to me showed, broken his promise to the electorate. He had, to my mind, violated his oath of office. He had, to my mind, violated the oath of allegiance to the United States Constitution, which even the ordinary American citizen is expected to take every time he gets a new passport. It was obviously a mere question of hours between that day and hour and the time when the United States of America would be legally at war with the Axis. I spent a month trying to figure things out. Well, did I? Perhaps I concluded sooner. At any rate, I had a month clear to make up my mind about some things. I had Confucius and Mencius, both of whom had been up against similar problems, both of whom had seen empires fallen, both of whom had seen deeper into the causes of human confusion than most men ever think of looking. Then there was my old dad in bed with a broken hip. Lord knows who is going to mend it, or whether it will mend. So I read him a few pages of Aristotle in the Loeb Classical Library, English version, to take his mind off it, also to keep my own work in progress. Because for some time I had in mind the need of comparing the terminology of Chinese and Greek philosophy, and also comparing that with the terminology of medieval Catholic theology. No, for a man cut off from all his normal contacts from the non-European world, I can't say I was destitute mentally. There was plenty lying there for me to be busy about, if I had wanted to contract out, if I had wanted to go into a funk hole. I had a nice sizable funk hole, about as good as an endowed professorship in one of our otiose or veiled, shall we say, veiled universities, or even Oxford or Cambridge.
plenty of muckers down there, setting pretty and drawing $5,000 or $10,000 a year for not telling. I reckon it is Mencius who thought that the true sage seeks no repose. It is not a claustral motto. I began figuring out that a complete severance of communication between the calm and sentient men is not to be desired. I have before now pointed out that England was cut off from the current of European thought during and by the Napoleonic Wars, and that she never got catched up again, not during all the damned nasty and 19th century. Always lagging behind, perhaps she always was lagging behind. I have pointed out the difference of up-to-dateness between Voltaire and Mr. Samuel Johnson. At any rate, it is no good. The United States has been misinformed. The United States has been led down the garden path, and maybe down under the daisies, all through shutting out news. There is no end to the amount of shutting out news that the sons of blood who started this war and wanted this war and monkeyed around to get the war started and monkeyed around to keep the war going and spreading. There is no end to the shutting out and perversions of news that these blighters ain't up to, and that they haven't and aren't still trying to compass. Whatever happens is not going to do the United States any good to be as cut off from all news and all news of contemporary thought, like the damn fools and utterly decadent Britons have got themselves cut off from. As you can hear from the British Blurb Corporation any Monday and Tuesday evening, and any Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday evening that you choose to listen into their phenomenal hogwash. That's where they've got to, and for their being there, neither I nor any man I shake hands with is to blame in any way whatsoever. Every English friend I got in the world has done his damnedest to keep England from making such a thundering and abysmal ass of herself. As for my American friends, Senator Borah is dead. Not that I knew him much save by letter, but I can still feel his hand on my shoulder as just before he was getting into an elevator in the Senate building, and I can still hear him saying, "Well, I'm sure I don't know what a man like you would find to do here." That was a few days sooner, maybe, the first time I met him. Neither he nor William J. Bryan lived to hear Senator Wallace telling the world there would be no peace till the nations of the world knocked under and bowed down to the gold standard. Bowed down like drunken and abject fools, and said, "Let gold rule humanity, let all human exchange of goods be bottle-necked, and ask permission from a few bloodthirsty kikes who own gold. Bow down and say monopoly is God over all men," and this from a man said to be or to have been interested in farmers and farmers' welfare. This after all the lies from the London gold ring, this after 20 years of evasion, this in fact after 20 years' attempt to conceal from the English people that they were being asked to go out and die for gold, for the monopoly of the owners and brokers, owners of gold mines, brokers and owners of gold. Back in December I had never expected such a confession from anyone as high in office. Yes, I knew that was what the war was about. Gold, usury, and monopoly. I had said as much when I was last in America. I had then said, if a war is pushed onto us, so now we have got pushed out of Guam and Wake, and I suppose out of the Philippines, and a 30 years' war is in process, isn't it? Is it? Is a 30 years' war what the American citizen thinks will do most good to the United States of America? Or has someone been misinformed? And if so, who misinformed him? According to the reports of the American press now available to the average European, someone in charge of American destiny miscalculated something or other. An inquiry is in progress, at least as they print here. It being my private belief that I could have avoided a war with Japan if anybody had had the unlikely idea of sending me out there with any sort of official powers. The Japanese have a past. Of course, when I talk to them now, they are apt to remind me that they have also a present. They have not mentioned the future in our conversations. The last American journalist I saw, and that was the night before Arbor Day, told me the Japs would never, etc., etc. A nation evolves by process of history. Japan to me consists in part of what I learned from a sort of half-trunk full of late Ernest Fenolos's papers. Anybody who has read the plays entitled Kumaska and Kagakiyo would have avoided the sort of bilge printed in Time and the American press, and the sort of fetid imbecility I heard a few nights ago from the British Broadcasting Company. There are certain depths of ignorance that can be fatal to a man or a nation. When these are conjoined with malice and baseness of spirit, it seems almost useless to mention them. A BBC commentator somewhere about January 8th was telling his presumably music hall audience that the Japs were jackals, and that they had just recently, I think he said, within living men's lifetime, emerged from barbarism. I don't know what patriotic end you think, or he thinks, or the British authorities think, if that is the verb, is served by such fetid ignorance. A glance at Japanese sword guards, a glance at Jimmy Whistler's remarks about hokusai, or, as I indicate a minute ago, a familiarity with the Aoi no Yui, Kumasaka, Ishikigi, or Funabenkai. These are Japanese classical plays, and would convince any man with more sense than a peahen of the degree of Japanese civilization, let alone what they conserved when China was, as Fenollosa tells us, incapable of preserving her own cultural heritage. China letting Confucius go out of the schools, for example. And you needn't sniff the Bostonians' culture bund, needn't sniff and say the British Broadcasting Company, the bloody boobs corporation, is over in vulgar London. Such things couldn't happen in Boston. Almost equal imbecility was attained by Time Weekly magazine in November 1941. Someone had apparently blundered, as Lord Tennyson wrote of the charge of balaclava. And blundered, we think, considerably worse. Well, now, who blundered? A commission has been appointed, possibly to whitewash who blundered. I don't know that it is in the citizen's duty to whitewash who blundered. I think the United States and even her British allies might do well to keep more in touch with continental opinion. I don't think anybody is going to whitewash who blundered into the alliance with Russia. I think there are some crimes that nothing will whitewash. I don't think an alliance with Stalin's Russia is lucky. I don't think the crime of even going through the motions of inviting Russia into slaughter and kill all Eastern Europe is a necessary part of the program. Program of defense, program of offense. I don't think this horror was necessary. I don't think it is the function even of the Commander-in-Chief of the United States American Army to dictate the citizens' politics. Not to the point of inviting Bolshevik Russia to kill off the whole east of Europe. I don't think it is a lucky move, even if Eden hopes to double-cross Russia, which nothing indicates that he does hope. The day Hitler went into Russia, England had her chance to pull out. She had her chance to say, "Let bygones be bygones. If you can stop the Muscovite horror, we will let bygones be bygones. We will try to see at least half of your argument." Instead of which Hank Wallace comes out, "No peace till the world accepts the gold standard. Cum Deus vult perdere." Does look like there was a weakness of mind in some quarters. Whom God would destroy, he first sends to the bug house. End of number 6, on resuming. Ezra Pound speaking, Radio Speeches of World War II. Ezra Pound speaking, Radio Speeches of World War II. Number 7, February 3rd, 1942, USA 2. 30 years or 100. The prospect of a 30 years' war is not one to arouse mirth and hilarity even in a flighty, chicken-headed, and irresponsible people such as the United States of Americans. You are in it, and Lord knows who is a-going to get you out. The late Lord Rothermere, whose culture was nothing, as you might say, to write home about, finally decided that the English public was wholly unteachable. I don't know whether you can learn anything from history. I don't know whether you are even yet in the state of mind where you want to learn anything from history or from any other source whatsoever. A way to get yourselves out might be discoverable. It might be more discoverable if you first had the faint inkling of a curiosity as to how you got yourselves in. Now, whether you can learn anything from the disasters of England, I do not know. But I would about lay it down as an axiom that empires do not get knocked apart from outside until they are plumb gone to rot in the middle. The laws of right government have been known since the days of Yao and Shun, old Chinese emperors, and from the time of Shun to King Wen was 1,000 years, and from Wen to Confucius 500. And they say when the policies of Shun and of Wan were set together, compared, they were as the two halves of a seal, or it might be of a tally stick. And for nigh on to 4,000 years, I think, no one has dodged the facts of these policies. And from the time of Confucius, every dynasty in China that has lasted 300 years has been founded on the law of Confucius. A man or a group seem the hoarse sense of government, as learned by Confucius. I mean, he learned it looking at history, talking of Shun and Wan, and after him, whenever a great man learned it, he started or upheld some sort of imperial order. And for that reason I am distinctly unimpressed by the bombastic lies of Mr. Winston Churchill, or of the dirt of Mr. Anthony Eden. And if the United States was going to have a foreign alliance, I would have preferred it to be with some other kind of a government than Eden and Churchill. There are worse things than a biff on the jaw. Get slugged on the jaw, you can maybe get up and fight, but a long term of syphilis weakens the Constitution. No, the United States has, politically and economically speaking, had economic political syphilis for the past 80 years, ever since 1863, and England has had economic syphilis for 240 years. So now she's a molten and drooping. Hong Kong, Singapore, Canada, and Australia seems like it is tertiary. Well, as Lord Rothermere said, they are unteachable.
I don't know how much more they reckon to drop before they get ready for physic. I have said on this radio before now that along about 1695 or 94, the Bank of England was put together, and in 1750 they shut down the Pennsylvania colony money and the system of lending paper out to the farmers. And in 1776 the natural consequences of that dirty London policy of starving and cheating became, as they say, more apparent. And a year or two later Johnny Adams said to the British commander, "They were having a parley," says John Adams. "I don't care what capacity I am received in. Receive me in any capacity you like, except that of a British subject." So the first large-scale effect of the London cheating and money monopoly was the loss of the American colonies. The Chinese have a method of counting cycles of 80 years. I don't know that there is much in it, but it seems to work sometimes. 80 years from the bank to the American Revolution. About 80 years from the starting of American government to the great betrayal of 1863. Think it over, and from 63 to the present, our rise as a state through 3 or 4 major but positive convolutions, like Jefferson's revolt against Hamilton's dirtiness, the Jackson-Van Buren War for the liberation of the American treasury, Lincoln's saying, "Gave to this people the greatest blessing they ever had, their own paper to pay their own debt," and then the assassination of Lincoln. And then another 80 years to the end and absolute collapse of the American system of government. Can we revive it? Has the country got the guts for the climb? Is there, as I am saying this, the faintest stirring of a desire inside the United States for any healthy new structure? Or are we the gathering swine taken with collective hysteria? Are there 10 men in America ready calmly to go back over the events of the past few years in America and in England? Is there the faintest stirring of American curiosity as to how a sane government could be built up? Or at any rate, any nucleus or group ready to go back and learn how we built up from the beginning? Adams, Jefferson, and Van Buren to read and digest. You can't talk it over with me, because none of you can get to a radio. You can't print stuff like this in your papers, because the newspapers are not there to inform the people. You have got to talk to each other. You have got to write letters one to another. The texts and the guides you have got, that is, in a way you have got 'em sprawled out in big sets of unhandy volumes. Our publishers don't print handy compendiums. Your professors don't analyze, that is, not very much. I don't know what has become of Claude Bowers. He did a bit of digging about. You have a half-dozen historians, but not all of them by any means able to take out the facts and show how they hitch together. I don't know how you think you are going to assist in a war by a money system which, as Jefferson already saw, charges the public $2 for every dollar spent by the government, just automatically and independent of any particular grafting and swindling. 30 years of war, 30 years paradise for army contractors, may not be what you voted for. In fact, Mr. Franklin D. Roosevelt on that score is manifestly what they called him here the other day, the boy that fell down on his assignment. And when you think, if you do think, of the billions that have been lifted by the Morgenthau Treasury policy during the past 9 years of peacetime, God knows. God knows what it will be during warfare, or by the end, shall we say, 30 years. Well, you are now in, and nobody in Europe can now get you out. Inspired, shall we say, by the principle of self-determination of peoples, oppressed peoples, illustrating it by the determination to keep Mr. Aguinaldo out of his native Manila, you have chucked away our national cultural heritage. Relatively speaking, that heritage was the determination of our forebears to set up and maintain in the North American continent a government better than any other. The determination to govern ourselves internally better than any other nation on earth. The idea of Washington, Jefferson, Monroe to keep out of foreign shindies. Well, you have chucked that idea or ideal into the dung heap, and you have insulted the most highly tempered people on earth. With unspeakable vulgarity you have insulted the most finely tempered people on earth, threatening them with starvation, threatening them with encirclement, and telling them they were too low down to fight. You are at a war for the duration of the Tenno's pleasure. Nothing in the Western world, nothing in the whole of our Occident can help you to dodge that. Nothing can help you dodge it. I could go along on this line for some time, but maybe I said enough for one evening. End of number 7, 30 Years or 100. Ezra Pound speaking, Radio Speeches of World War II. Ezra Pound speaking, Radio Speeches of World War II, edited by Leonard W. Dube. Number 8, February 10th, 1942, USA 69. The Stage in America. Europe calling, Ezra Pound speaking. Well, perhaps I won't stick to my title very closely. But to start off with, when I was in New York a little back, I saw Catherine Cornell in a play that was a bit soft, and the little sermon she gave from the stage, not quite part of the piece, sounded then a bit sentimental. I have no doubt that vague language is used on both sides of the present discussion. We can't all be stylists. I am Chasm, the method of war scares, the method used for getting people worked into hysteria. And part of it is attacking one wrong, appealing to the soft heart, and then by false dilemma offering the hearer a better of sheer bunkum, that is, offering him an alternative and doing a hat trick to make him think it is the only alternative. False dilemma, you call that in a logic class. Thus, with the stink of Russia, no one with any thought in Europe or North or South America believes in the abolition of ownership of everything. East Europe and North America believe in the homestead, from A to Z, and from bedrock to roof tree. The American people believe in the homestead. The members of the floating population, to which the top crust has been reduced, are beliefless. They got no belief. They want this, that, or t'other, tinsel and limelight. The young, I ain't the first to notice it, the young want this, that, or t'other. Often they want something different over 2 weeks. The stronger ones sit it. After they get to be 50, a few of them try to see what all the fuss was about. Lord knows, I volas ma bossa. I wanted metropolitan life, etc. But you can't run a whole state or nation on the predilections of a few writers and artists. When they ripen, as take the case of William Shakespeare, they get to hear at the homestead.
The whole and total best of civilization, Chinese or Western, is based on the homestead. It is not based on nomadic tribes and destructions. Being disgusted, as 98% of all decent men were, with the results of usuriocracy, moneylenders, de-civilization, moneylenders, ruin of the good life in the Occident and everywhere else they could get their dirty hooks onto. A lot of us fell for any alternative. Jump in the part we didn't look at very closely, never stopping to ask, do we believe Marx and Lenin? Hence part of the red and pink Beano. When their hair begins to lose its adolescent hue, a few men begin to think of a system, a working system, a base and basis for human living together. And the answer comes out the same. A house good enough for the ordinary folk to go on living in from one generation to the fourth and fifth generation. And you get relief, classically, in the Wonderjahre. Run around and look at the world. The Kikes and Frank Roosevelt and independent witnesses to tell what is going on elsewhere. In the old days it was the fatheads with privilege, or mediocre writers and architects and artists that did not want criticism. Every decent idea was to go around, see the best, and then come home and do better. That is the way the good life is built. The so-called stifling air of the provinces, etc., was due to fear, due to shunning comparisons, while if every American would get up tomorrow morning and ask himself what he really wants, there would be an end to the Roosevelt hysteria. That is to say, it would not spread like a pest throughout the American nation. If the citizen, after having asked himself that, would then go on to the old rights of man and say, how much of it can I get without doing dirt to my neighbor, the good life would approach very rapidly, more rapidly than it usually does if we can trust to the human record. Yes, I know what the decent English are resisting, and what they were even ready to fight to resist. And if they had any clear-headedness, that would be dandy. They want their cultural heritage. They think the English once had nice manners. Well, I was talking to a friend of mine, and she was born with a name sacred to every man who cares for poetry written in English, Rossetti, and she said, the worst manners come from people trying to be nasty to people who they consider inferior. Matter of class, and the Nazis have wiped out that feeling and wiped out bad manners in Germany. The new Europe goes on now, doing what American democracy, in the clean sense of that word, started doing when it made a declaration of independence, but failed to define all the words used, or compromised on the wording, struck out Jefferson's original sentences about abolition of slavery, and for the sake of a vote, omitted to specify that equal means equal in the courts of law, no man having privilege over any other to be let off certain penalties because he was the son of his papa or had been to a university. I told my rare and precious readers 10 years ago that there was an anti-snob movement in Italy. Of course, no one paid any attention to that sentence, so I repeated. Some things you are learning 30 years late, some things 20 and 10 years, and in others you swallow goof like Mr. Donovan, Colonel Donovan, or you merely get hooked with press lies, contradicted 2 days or 10 days later. I have a weakness for newspaper writers, ever since a fellow named Monsieur turned up in London in 1915 or some such, and later when there weren't any new book writers. I took to my newspaper colleague, who of course allus looked down on the outsider, but a few of them were kindly and tolerant, regarding me as an amateur who didn't menace their paycheck, and I finally took to noticing the waves of credulity that pass over 'em. They know that most of what they can print is all horse, but they believe certain unprinted rumors. Sure, we were to invade Dakar. Well, I don't deny it. Sometimes their tips are straight, but we do almightily need a better system of communication. We need a greater honesty. Naturally, and I don't mean merely about stealing and graft. I mean inside the individual head. A greater resistance to these waves of hokum. Do you want the destruction of the people of Iceland? Is Finland a menace to anyone save a few kike owners of nickel mines? Do the Bites and Sassoons and their delegates represent the best English tradition? If the United States is to steal and embezzle, wouldn't it be wiser to stick to French, English, and Dutch dependencies in the American hemisphere? And wouldn't it be honester to get same by purchase, even if it meant fewer immediate profits to the tinned meat and armament rackets? End of number 8. Ezra Pound speaking. Radio Speeches of World War II. Ezra Pound speaking. Radio Speeches of World War II. Number 9. February 12th, 1942. U.S. A71. Canto 46. This recording is the original broadcast. Closed captions are source text.
This is the Cheltenham Broadcasting System. The next part of our program will follow immediately.
Please listen to a talk by Ezra Pound entitled Canto 46.
Cheltenham Radio, acting in accordance with the precious policy of intellectual freedom and free expression of opinion by those who are qualified to hold it, following the tradition of eternal hospitality, has thus adopted Ezra Pound the use of the microphone twice a week. It is understood that he will not be asked to say anything whatsoever that goes against his conscience, or anything incompatible with his duties as a citizen of the United States of America. You're calling, Ezra Pound speaking. I'm reading you another canto for divers reasons. Contains things that will hint at things that you will have to know sooner or later. Ball or no ball, war or no war. And as I stated last time, I'm feeding you the footnotes first in case there is any possible word that might not be easily comprehended. The decennial and the decennial exposition was the exhibition in Rome at the end of the first 10 years of the fascist regime, Mussolini's fascist regime. They set up the office model of the office of the old Popolo d'Italia, very like what had been the New Age office in London, except that Elijah's office contained a couple of places which had never been published. Look into the commission sought after the Water War, to look into the commission sought after the Water War, to look into the sins of the British financial system. And in is a Roman emperor. Lex Lodi, the law of Rome. Well, I'll talk about that in Canada, where you can see. The Latin phrase, aurum est commune sepulchrum, means gold is the common sepulchre, common grave of all men. It parallels the line about Troy being the common grave. I think it is part of a line about the Persians, but it don't matter who it's quoted from. The Greek, Helandros, Coelectris, Coelarity, is more or less twisted from the line of Aeschylus about Helen of Troy, the destroyer of cities. Gideon or Gideoni is an allegorical beast in Dante's hell, symbol of pride and all dirtiness. The sea monumentum is a Latin tag meaning if you are looking for a monument. And the other phrase, Hic Hoto Usura, means this is extra strong usually, super usually. All right, now I'm going on with Canto 46. And if you say that this day teaches a lesson, oh, but the Reverend Eliot has found their natural language. You who think you will get through that day are those clouds, highway, and for 3 days, snow cloud over the sea, days, snow cloud over the sea, banked like a line of mountains, snow fell, or rain fell, solid, a wall of lines, so that you could see what I stopped open, and while the rain fell beside it, or the snow fell beside it. 17 years on this case, 19 years, 90 years on this case, and the fuzzy bloke says, legs no fancy a wood foot. If that is so, any government worth a damn can pay dividends. The Major chilled a bit and says, yes, you mean instead of collecting taxes? Instead of collecting taxes. So that office is a field decennial, decennial position, reconstructed offices are impopular. Office are impopular, where ours was like that, minus the mule bomb and the teapot. Heavy lit chap at the desk, one horse, green eye, one blonde one, 19 years on this steep crime of the century, 5 million being killed off to 1919, and before that, deaths of the South in New York, that is to the banks of the city, 200 million. Well, I don't think, but have it your own way about slavery. 5 million being killed off, couple of masters drowned, one a Balfour and a camel, and one which for obvious reasons has never been published. All kind of do our handkerchief, it has never been published. He ain't got an opinion, says the laws about CBS. There's the laws about Mr. Chesterton. There's the laws about Mr. Rose. You have an opinion. Trouble is that you need it. You never will be a journalist. 19 years on this case. Suburban Garden. Weeks of John Normandy. A couple of art traits. Letters. Never could set up a nation. Wouldn't convert me. Wouldn't have me converted. Stood. I know I didn't ask you. Your father sent you here to be trained. I know what I'd do, send my son to England and have him come back a Christian. That's what I feel. Suburban Garden, Siradu Baha, I said, let us speak of religion. The camel driver said, I must meet my camel. So when he had moved his camel, I said, let us speak of religion. And the camel driver said, it is time to drink milk. We will have some. For politeness, I tried to join him. Have you all tasted milk from a camel? I was unable to drink camel milk. I had never been able. So he drank all the milk, and I said, let us speak of religion. I have drunk my milk, I must pass, said the driver. We did not speak of religion. Thus Abdul Baha, third vice general of the first Abdullah, whatever Baha, the sage, the uniter, the founder of a religion, in a garden of Everton, governor, maybe with some other damn suburb, but at any rate a suburban suburb, amid a slaughter of teacups. Said Mr. Mohammedans never will understand us. They lie, Arabs lie. I mean personally, they are mendacious. That if the tribe gets together, the tribal word will be kept. Hence perpetual understanding, misunderstanding. Englishman goes there, lives honest, word is reliable, can live, they believe, and then he stands for his government. And naturally the treaty is broken. Mohammedans, nomads, never will understand how we do this. When the Lord on the street, we not the first lot, said Odafone, at benefit of interest and all the monies which it, the bank, creates out of nothing. And it started in recent said Mr. Rothschild, Henry, which Rothschild, 1861, 64, or there sometime. Very few people will understand this. Those who do will be occupied getting profits. The general public will probably not see it's against their interest. 20 years on this case, we against use RV concession. Can we take this into court? Will any jury convict on this evidence? 1694 Anno Domini on through the ages of usury. On right on it a haircut, right on it a Waffle building, right on it a London houses, ground rent, speeded brickwork. Will any jury convict them? The foundation of Regis professors was laid to spread lies and teach wiggery. Will any jury convict them? The Macmillan Commission, about 240 years late, with great difficulty got back to Peter Funds. The bank makes it ex nihilo from nothing. Denied by 5,000 professors, will any jury convict them? This case, and with it the first part of this poem, draws to conclusion the first phase of this opus. Mr. Karl Marx did not foresee this conclusion. We have seen a good deal of the evidence, not knowing its evidence. Monumentums. What about you? Look at your Janet St. Peter's. Look at the Manchester slums. Look at Brazilian coffee or Chilean nitrates. This case is the first case. The Requiris Monumentum. This case is not the last case or the whole case. We ask a revision. We ask for enlightenment in a case moving concurrent. The fifth case is the first case. Bank creates it from nothing, creates it to meet a need. Which has Peter Usura. Mr. Jefferson met it. No man hath natural right to exercise profession of lender, save him who has it to lend. Refleren et stato, what wrangle, which wrangle, and your method. Before that we had changed empty the harbour, before that was already in the schoolbooks, placed there not as ever. In the schoolbooks, placed there not as ever. In the schoolbooks, placed there not as ever. In the schoolbooks, place idle minds, murder, starvation, and bloodshed set before the revolution. 10 empires fell on this Greece spot. I rule the earth, so down to Nile, but love rules the sea. Lining the Turkish lakes, raging the law maritime of St. Myers, Uzura and Sea Insurance, where from no state was erected greater than Athens. Welding taxes to build St. Peter's, thought Luther beneath civil notice 1527. Thereafter art thickened, thereafter design went to hell, thereafter Barocco, thereafter stone cutting desisted, it Naples Commune Sepulchrum. 19 years on this case, first case, I have set down part of the evidence, part Commune Sepulchrum, aurum est Commune Sepulchrum, usura Commune Sepulchrum, Elandras Caelectoris, Caelarche, hic Geriones, hic hyper usura. 5 million Jews without jobs, 4 million adults illiterate, 15 million vocational misfits, that is with small chance for jobs, 9 million persons annual injured in preventable industrial accidents, 100,000 violent crimes. The United States of America, 3rd year of the reign of F. Roosevelt, signed F. Delano his uncle. Case for the prosecution. That is one case. Minor case in the series. United States of America, Anno Domini 1935. And England, a worse case. France under a feeder of regents. Headline in current paper, Mr. Cummings wants all his jobs. At the end of January 46, Ezra Pound speaking.
We've been listening to a talk by Ezra Pound entitled Chapter 26. This is an Italian broadcasting system. We next present a concert of opera selection. Please listen to the introduction to the opera The Voyage to Rest by Rossini.
End of number 9, Canto 46, Ezra Pound speaking, radio speeches of World War II. Ezra Pound speaking, radio speeches of World War II. Number 10, FCC transcript, February 17th, 1942. USA 72, Sale and Manufacture of War. This challenge is a chance to about the sale and manufacture of war. This war is part of a profit. The present phase of that profit began at the end of the 17th century. By 1750, a corrupt and avaricious government in England, working for British monopolies, was shutting down on the Pennsylvania colony's issue of money. Paper money, money issued against land, work, and the industrious and sane nature of the Pennsylvania colonists. I have given between 70 and 100 talks on the radio, and if I come back to the microphone 100 or 200 times more, I could start every talk with that statement. Until you see this war as an incident in a series, you cannot understand it or judge it or qualify yourselves as judges of the rights and wrongs of the present act in the story. Will men of my generation in America stop to consider what is not printed? Will Americans between the ages of 50 and 60 look back honestly over their own reading over what they have read during the past 50 years? Note the vague dissatisfaction, the sense of bafflement, especially for the man who reads after working hours. Now take the current issue of supposedly serious magazines that are certainly authoritative in a twisted sense, authoritative and influential. I believe one of them nominated Wilkie, and by now perhaps that fact needs no comment whatever. I've been accused in these talks, but if anyone has seriously answered any of my statements, they have been unable to do so in any form that reaches me. While I ask my compatriots of my own age to note that the very high percentage of articles printed in American magazines contains a joker, that is a silent point, a basically false assumption. I don't mean they all contain the same false assumption. I point K out that there is no public medium in the United States for serious discussion. Every one of these publications has subjects which its policy forbids it to mention or to mention without falsification. And I ask the men in my generation to consider the effects, the cumulative effect of this state of things, which does not date from September 1941, but has been going on ever since we can remember. The progressive falsification of America has been going on for 80 years, at least, and we have lived through half of it. I mean, as conscious leaders, we have had 40 years of ill-intentional and semi-conscious befuddlement to contend with, and it is time to come to the cumulative effect of that profit. Baruch, Burrow, Best, to take 3 names starred in American publicity, 1 pronouncement and 2 headlined articles are before me. All of these men writing and speaking with authority of a sort official positions dominant in national affairs, and with such views that no man under 40 can possibly untangle their cobwebs. In normal times, qualified readers wouldn't try. They would let it go at that. They would be busy on constructive work. The old and indifferent, the experienced and indifferent, and a cautious son of a New York editor, now in his 70th year. I mean the son in his 70th year, remembered his fathers. He shrugged his shoulders, or did when I saw him last autumn. Who is he to impede human carnage? The folly of all mankind ain't nothing, but human imbecility gives us an idea of the infinite, and in a way, as he said, do nothing about it. Well, there is still time to learn something about it, still time to fight against a peace that can be no peace, still time to fight against widespread efforts to prevent the end of the slaughter, which efforts are being made. I mean, people are now trying to prevent the war from ending. People have already planned for a peace like the last, a mere parenthesis, a mere slow up of munition sales, a mere disequilibrium that will keep the world on tenterhooks between the end of this war and the start of the next one. You cannot sit in Ohio and judge the Balkans. You cannot judge China from Omaha. You could read, and perhaps some American will someday make a vow to read 1 old paper or magazine once a month. By all means, say 3 or 6 months old. And once a year read a still older one that might give you a perspective. Unless you know at least as much about the past 20 years of Italian history as is contained in an old volume on Italian socio-economic policy, you will not be able to observe how much of our old programs has been recently endorsed by Barney Baruch, nor will you be able to see the price of confidence was. Article in October, Fortune A. Burrell, Assistant Secretary of State. Well, when I was in Washington, a member of the cabinet told me that so far as he knew, Barney was a patriotic gentleman. Baruch now came out for a constituted price, a price in accord with, a price that would guarantee just recompense to everyone who collaborates in a final product. I will be ready to consider Baruch's a patriot when he comes out seriously for abolition of the national debt. He is far in that lives in the new economics. Now, Burrell's article is very nice in the second half. End of number 10. Ezra Pound speaking, radio speeches of World War II.